You're listening to Season 2 of the Mies podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, a culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, we're going to talk to high performers in the food business, everything from chefs to CEOs, technologists, writers, investors, and more, about how they innovate and operate and how they consistently execute at a high level, day after day. And I would really love it if you could drop us a 5-star review anywhere that you listen to your podcast. That could be Apple, that could be Spotify, could be Google. I'm not picky. Anywhere works, but I really appreciate the support. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show.
With every stroke of the pencil, I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences. You could
Our guest today is Chef Fiore Tedesco. Chef Fiore is the co-owner of Loca d'Oro in Austin, along with his business partner, Adam Orman. They're also involved with this really awesome organization called Good Work Austin, which you should check out. He is opening a new pizza joint that sounds pretty incredible as well. And all around, he's just a pretty amazing chef. And his background is also something that I did not know nearly as much about until we had this conversation. And wow, it was pretty incredible. I met Fiore a couple years ago. We cooked together at this event for indie chefs in Austin. And I mean, I knew right away, just really, really nice guy and also very talented. Fast forward though, when we had this conversation on the podcast, man, there was so much I learned about his background. Everything from produced a movie with a couple folks. He also grew up deaf for the first, I think, 5 or 6 years of his life. And that had a huge impact on, well, not only just sort of a struggle that he dealt with for many years, but heightening other senses that later on, I think, had a big impact on how he became the chef that he is today. A lot of other struggles. He was homeless for several weeks, I think maybe even a couple months, living in Washington Square Park in New York. Was in the music industry and the fashion industry, and also worked for some really incredible chefs in New York, namely the Gramercy Tavern, Chef Michael Anthony. Shout out, Chef Mike. Anyways, Fiore moved to Austin, opened up this spot. It's his sort of take on Italian cuisine. His grandparents are from Italy, and he grew up eating Italian cuisine. And this was sort of his opportunity to step away from so much of the technical piece of cooking and get more into the soul of cooking. And man, there was a lot of soul in today's conversation. We went pretty deep into his background growing up, so some of the suffering that he went through and how it's impacted his life. And then sort of fast forward, talked a little bit about how do we actually start to instill some of that idea of suffering into the next generation, whether that's our kids or our team, because if we're doing our job well as people, the next generation should have a little bit easier of a time than the last generation. I think that definitely is true in the kitchens, right? There's not nearly as many hours. You're not having shift pay, all these, doubles on Sundays and among many other things. But there's still adversity. And part of what we were trying to sort of get to the bottom of is how do you instill that adversity organically, safely, respectfully, so that, folks can learn and grow and build resilience. And we spent some time talking about that as it relates to his kids, as it relates to running a team, and much more. Anyways, it was really, really incredible conversation. A curveball for me, but a good one. And as always, I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Stoked to see you. I feel like the only time I met you was I was doing an Indie Chefs event, and you were...
That's right.
And we went to your restaurant afterwards. It was like a party, right?
That's right.
Were you like doing something for the event? Or I think you specifically hosted the party for that event, right?
I hosted that party, which was like the first night. It was before the other stuff started. And then we met there. We were together. It was either the next night or the night after at Foreign and Domestic. We did a dinner there.
That's right.
Of course, you and Sergio were both there, and
yeah, I remember.
Yeah, there were a bunch of cats there. Trying to think, like, I don't believe Sarah or Nathan. I don't know which one of them was there.
Sarah
Phil
was
Spear
there.
Was there.
Yeah,
Sarah was there.
Yeah. Philip was there. It was a good event, man. Anyways, I didn't mean to throw you on the spot for that, but so to catch up with you.
Likewise,
it's been quite a while. But because I remember specifically when I met you, I had just learned about Good Work Austin, and I was like, I want to learn more about that. And then I didn't.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So I'm going to learn today.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that.
Nice.
But if it's cool, before we get into, I'm assuming we're talking about a bunch about your background today and Austin and your restaurant, of course. But what's Severed Ways? When I was like doing some research, my assistant sent me a bunch of stuff over. She sent me a link to IMDb. I'm like, nah, that must be a different Fiore. But I don't think it is. I think that's
it's the same guy.
What is that?
It's a 10th century period piece that a small group of us made. It was directed by a fellow named Tony Stone. It was his idea, and so it's a film that got released via Magnet Pictures, and it was in like something like a dozen film festivals and won several of them, and I was at a few of them, kind of like standing ovations at like the LA Film Festival, did talkback at, and then it got released via Magnet Films, and we got a New York Times write-up on the film. I co-wrote the film and co-starred in it. The credit, I have I got a big fight with Tony. I have a like story by credit because right before he got into the final edits, he kind of erased all the text that I wrote and dubbed in gibberish.
What?
Yes. A kind of wild story. But the heart of it was like I was living in the woods in Vermont for like 3 months out of the year for a couple years making this film with like 4 of my best friends and sort of working full time as an artist. And I was going on tour with my band in between shooting. And that was my life for a couple years.
So this is before you got into food, when you were still like, you were a drummer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I was into food. I'd cooked on and off, and I grew up cooking.
Yeah.
I grew up cooking in hotels and restaurants, but was not serious about it.
Gotcha.
You know, the difference of like, oh, this thing's cool. And then the being dialed in and be like, I'm accountable to something and to someone.
Yeah. Why did you want to make this movie? And what was the impetus for making a movie? Because you made one and then you stopped and started, got into food at some point, or more into food, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, I was making all kinds of weird art projects. I was working on like a avant-garde dance piece with my buddy Claire, who I was in a band with, and I had my bands, and then I had like my side projects. I was committed to just expressing all kinds of art. Tony was a fan of one of my bands and asked me to make this movie with him, asked me to write it with him. And then we thought that Andrew WK was going to be starring in it. And then he pulled out last minute. And so I ended up acting in it. Tony and I ended up being the lead actors. And there are a bunch of real actors in the film as well.
How did that feel, acting in a movie?
I loved it. I was all in. I was like super committed to the process, super committed to the whole thing for the couple of years. I was really all in, really serious about it. And I thought that was where my life was heading after finished that film. And, being at the film festivals and stuff, people are like, oh, I thought I had some momentum as an actor and started getting auditions for these kind of wild parts that went to real famous people, like real actors. And I didn't get those parts. And after several of those auditions, I was like, this is lame. I don't want to do this anymore.
You mean like culturally,
like
culturally, it was just like not.
It was more like the process of auditioning and not getting parts. I'm like, I don't know how these people live lives like this. Where just like, I'm asking for the right to work and just keep saying no. And then it reminded me of being like 19 and being in the city. And I was trying to get jobs in real kitchens and getting told no then.
When was that? You say the city, so New York City?
Yeah, I moved to the city in 98.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I had a sort of a circuitous path to anything. I ended up hustling my way into a stylist assistant job on some retail fashion shoots, which turned into a design. I had a fancy design job at Victoria's Secret for about 2.5 years, designing interiors. Although, like, personally, I was a mess and did not know, I couldn't like balance a checkbook, and there's just so much volatility. I was there was a stretch where I was like working at Victoria's Secret and had to look the part and kind of was softly lying about my age and my education. I was 20 years old. My HR thought I was 28 and graduated from like Oberlin. I think I told them because
Did you randomly choose Oberlin as the place?
I was like, that sounds like an art school they're not going to follow up with. Uh, but
That's
meanwhile, I was like homeless living in Washington Square Park
oh my gosh.
because I got kicked out of my apartment after a fight with my roommate. Yeah. And I had like no money, had like no prospects, but I had this job, but where I was getting paid like every 6 weeks as a contractor. So I was just like, well, I have to show up and continue to work and I have to look the park. So I would just sleep at the park and pack my leather pants and my silk shirt in a bag and wake up and like shower in the sink at Washington Square Park. And the guys that played chess over there, I knew a little bit and was friendly with, so they looked after me at night.
That's crazy. How long did you do that for?
I did that twice for like 3 weeks at a time.
Wow. So
Yeah.
so how long was it before? What was the period in which you didn't have a place to stay?
Like what year?
Just
Like,
the time frame. Like how many weeks or months or days or?
it'd be like 3 weeks straight. And then I got in a volatile situation, got out of again. And I was homeless for another couple of weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So about 5 weeks total. Yeah. And I didn't tell my family. I was not talking to any of my friends really, because I was pretty lost and I felt like I was just lying all the time. I was lying to my
Yeah.
bosses about who I was, lying to myself about this being a good idea, living the life that I was living, and just I didn't know how to be accountable to myself or anything else, but was just I was working through kind of a lot of the toughness and unresolved feelings and some of the trauma of of some childhood stuff and trying to like work it out in real time and trying to figure out how to not be self-destructive, It took me a long time to get through a lot of that, but I had to face some real demons up front with that.
So wow. I have a million questions, and I didn't know so much of this. So first of all, thanks for sharing this with me. What drove you to work in the city, to stay in the city, to decide like I need to do this, and it's okay if if I don't have a place to stay, I need to do this. What was that voice that was pushing you to do that?
I was worried that where I came from, like my family unit was had decayed. There was like a lot of bad things had happened within my family and were continuing to happen. The prospects within our family unit was not great at the time. It was not positive. And I wondered, that was in upstate New York.
This was in
about
Troy.
3 hours north. Troy, New York. Yeah. Yeah. And I was really motivated leaving as a teenager to get out and make something of myself. And I was determined that I was going to find myself in the city. I was going to find my people. I was going to find my voice that I had felt kind of miscast growing up in the small town where I just got bullied pretty mercilessly through all of middle school. And I was really determined to make it work. I had decided years before that I was gonna live in New York City and I was gonna be successful. And so I didn't know what any of that meant, and I thought I had to grit it out.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anybody to lean on or anybody to, if anybody, I did have in the city, the one person I leaned on that was consistently showed up for me was Chef Leanne Wong.
Oh yeah, wow. Why Leanne?
Leanne and I grew up together. We went to the same high school. She was 2 years older than me, 2 grades ahead of me. And she bartended at a place called Dojo in the West Village. It's like a NYU, like kind of college bar restaurant.
Yep.
And it was around the corner from where I had been living. And so I moved to the city and she was my friend and she would feed me. And I would show up there and hadn't eaten in a couple of days, and she would feed me and never charge me. She just took care of me like a big sister. Yeah. I don't know if she ever knew like the kind of how desperate I was at times going in there.
It's a tough thing to share that with someone too, the depth at which things are. I think humans in general, right? We never really share how the depth of which of a depression or a darkness that we're in with most people,
Yeah, sure. The idea of like showing up and being like, "Hey, how are you today? Hey, I feel like I'm really at the edge of despair, and I don't know if I'm going to make it. But what do you want to talk about?"
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So you went to New York in '98, and then how long until so you were obviously in this design career, and then you started, was music and the film before? It sounds like that was after that, but was there some before and after that? And then what led you to kind of move from music to more into food and things like that?
Mm-hmm. I was playing drums for different bands as soon as I moved to the city, and I had dropped out of college in '98. I was at Hofstra University on a tennis scholarship. I played good tennis, but I tore my shoulder apart playing tennis. And a long story short, I lost my scholarship, moved to Florida to try to rehab my shoulder and get another scholarship. And I just tore my shoulder again, moved to the city kind of on a lark to follow through with the earlier promise that I had made to myself.
Mm-hmm.
It had been until 2001. There was a really significant change. To the early January of 2001, I got a contract with LVMH, with Veuve Clicquot, to work on the branding and design of the display packaging for Le Grand Dame, the Veuve Clicquot Le Grand Dame bottle. If you remember that came out in 2001. And I designed this really beautiful display packaging that I bid for and somehow got the contract. I was way in over my head. And the production of this display, of this whole marketing program, it was a $500,000 contract, basically. I was 21 and working on this by myself, where the other person that would have won this contract was a very established, well-known Japanese architect with an office of 40 people, right? It was wild that I won it. And then where the rubber met the road it was hard getting this thing that I designed produced really beautifully. It was a three plexiglass pieces that aligned and in slightly different colors that refracted a rainbow when natural light was shown on it. So in any display place that this was shining the bottle, as soon as natural light hit it, it was shining a rainbow back. It was a really cool effect that I learned how to do reading design magazines in my office, where I was trying to decide how I had this design job and how to justify it. So I got the contract, and then September 11th happened. And that day we were supposed to be delivering 300 of these display pieces to the LVMH offices in Connecticut, where the president had flown over to look at these things that I had built. And then the packages didn't show up. There was obviously a terrible, terrible day for everyone that was in New York City and beyond. So the September 11th, 2001, Twin Towers happened. I was in the middle of kind of this, just realizing early that morning that this contract that I had was about to fall apart, because the company that was building this piece I designed kind of shit the bed and didn't tell me, and were lying about it.
Wow.
And then the Twin Towers happens, and then there's no communication with anybody for several days. I lived on Bleecker Street.
Where on Bleecker?
On Bleecker and McDougal.
Oh, I lived on Bleecker and Thompson then. We were neighbors almost.
And so over the next 2 weeks, I had stuck around the city trying to rescue this job, but I was also I was traumatized, man. It was a tough time, and I didn't realize how damaging psychologically the effects of everything happened was. I was stood on the roof of my building and saw the second tower fall, and my cousin was in the building. He got out, spent the morning trying to find him, spent the next day and a half trying to find him. Yeah, it was wildly traumatizing. My girlfriend, that was like a final fracture in our relationship. We lived together. I was in the middle of losing my mind over this job. I didn't have room to take care of her in that time. she quickly, and she was like, I don't want to be in the States anymore. She's from Brazil. She left Brazil. I got a bleeding ulcer and was just kind of throwing up blood and was in a pretty sickly state. I had called the Westchester Mental Institute and was about to check myself in. She had been calling from Brazil saying, why don't you just come down here and let my family take care of you instead? And kind of flipped a coin and then it landed on tails. Tails was Brazil. So I flew to Brazil that night and was there for months. I was there for several months and kind of just restoring myself, getting well, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Came back to New York months later, got together with my cousin, who is now just graduating. We had grown up together. He was just graduating from college. We started a band together. And that was the start of my musical career, really. And spent a lot of the next 10 years on the road, touring and playing music and playing all kinds of art. And it was a really beautiful and furtive period in my life.
Yeah. I'm sure it was also somewhat cathartic and therapeutic to just have that release from everything else that had happened. I'm going to direct this a little bit because I unfortunately, we're going to talk about some other tough things in your life.
Cool.
But I promise for you and for the audience, we will get to some good stuff as well, because you have some amazing things going on right now. But from what I understand, you grew up deaf, at least the first part of your childhood. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. Yes. I was 90% deaf. So any of you growing up watching Charlie Brown or see the Charlie Brown reruns, the Charlie Brown in school, his teacher's voice, the wah, 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 wah. That's what I could hear, just sort of muffled, almost vibrations come in, but I had no idea couldn't really distinguish voices or certainly not words or anything like that.
How many years was it before you could actually start to ascertain what was being said?
First got my hearing, I was between 4 and 5.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah. At the time I had one older brother. I have a little brother that's 6 years younger. My brother Adam was about 2 years older.
Yeah. I know you can't remember much from, but I have a 3-year-old and an almost 5-year-old. So I'm pretty sure they won't remember most of what has happened in the last 4 years. I'm sure you can't remember a lot, but is there anything palpably you can remember about what that must have been, what that was like for you?
It's interesting. I have a lot of memories from that period. I have a lot of kind of sense memories, like really strong tactile sensations, really strong taste and smell memories.
Any you can think of that just come to mind?
Every Sunday I would go to my grandmother's house, and my grandparents lived basically on the bottom of a hill that we lived near the top of the hill. I would tug at my mom and dad to drive me down to Grandma and Poppy's house on Sunday morning because Grandma was cooking the meatballs, and I wanted to eat the first meatballs that came out of the pan before they went into the sauce. Right. So I would fry them in olive oil and then go into the sauce. And I was like, that is the magical place. So I would go and ask to, help roll meatballs and just be at my grandmother's hip. It's like the smell of the meatballs, it's almost like the smell of parsley frying in olive oil, and the parsley and the pecorino. I know what that smell and that taste is like. I can blink and it's 100% there. Yeah.
I have to imagine that has stuck with you for life as something that your sensory, your ability to sort of, smell and taste is still, amplified.
I would like to think so. It would be nice to say so as a chef, but it's also that feeling there, that even the memory of the way the light came in my grandmother's front window. I remember the print on my grandmother's house dress, and can remember the smell from the fabric softener they used, and those are all memories of safety,
Mm-hmm.
I was life was kind of chaos for us. My dad around that time went to prison. I was in prison for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And there was a big dissolution of the family unit. And so I have these sense memories that signify safety to me. And then later in life, after playing music, when I really started cooking, I started to realize that recreating some of these by cooking, I was able to recreate some of these sense memories that harken back to those feelings of safety, and that I could access different memories different ways that I didn't know how to before. And it was that emotional connection that really drew me into the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been to Troy before. It's a pretty beautiful town, very quintessential kind of Hudson River,
Yeah, it says you, pal.
well, if you're driving through, I don't know about the interior of it, but what was
Yeah.
it like growing up in Hudson River town with an Italian grandmother? Obviously you have these memories, but I say that sort of beautifulness because I live in Hudson River town as well, but we see that, but I'm sure that there's another side to growing up in a town like that. That's, pretty far from the city. What was that like growing up for you?
I mean, it is a stunning town. Early industrialism had a really beautiful place and impact in Troy, and the early architecture of the city and like the vast greenness of the place is like so lush and so beautiful. And I grew up in this really beautiful old Victorian house, like on the way out of Troy and on Route 2. And I had such a strong connection to nature and into that and the town altogether. I loved the way that town, part of it, the way it felt, the way I know every step of that. I would walk everywhere as a kid, and I felt like I knew every inch of that town, right? And every inch of the woods that I would walk through. Socially, it was really hard growing up as a deaf kid, and then getting by hearing later meant I had a speech impediment for a long time. I had a really strong lisp, and I had a really hard time connecting socially because of it, and I was kind of a target. Part of the effects of that post-industrialism town is growing up there is a mean, hard place. It was not an atmosphere of openness and welcomeness and acceptance. It was more an atmosphere of judgment and oppression, or my experience of it was. And so kids were mean to each other because their parents were mean to each other. I think it's turned towards being a nice place again. But in the 15 or plus years that I was there, I would think might have been amongst its worst time in the last couple of 100 years or however long it's been a city. It was a mean place to grow up. I have a lot of beautiful memories as well, but yeah, kids were way meaner to me and to each other than I wish they would have been. And I was really fighting to get out from an early age. From like 12, 13, I was just itching for a way out, which motivated me to, I excelled in music, oddly, as a person that was deaf and then got their hearing. I had some preternatural instincts as a drummer. For some reason, I latched on to tennis as the thing that was going to be the way out for me. Despite nobody in my family playing tennis or having any real connection to it, I latched onto it and committed myself to it. And it kind of did the thing I asked it to do.
Yeah, I know that feeling, man. Well, look, I know you have at least one daughter because your restaurant is named after her, Lucinda. And so I'm curious, I have to imagine you have a perspective on this, on the benefit of adversity, because obviously so much of that sucks. But what is the good that came from that? Because, you talk about, how difficult it was growing up. A lot of people have tough childhoods. Yours seems incredibly tough. But this is such a tough subject because I do believe, and now I have two kids, that resilience is this thing that you have to try and instill. We also have cooks, we have team members. You want to try and instill this resilience in folks, and you can't have that without some suffering. What's your perspective on that, given how much suffering you've had? What do you think how important is that to building resilience? And then how do you actually instill that in your kids or your team, like respectfully, safely, if you feel like that's important?
Yeah. I mean, from, I guess, a macro or like getting into like a kind of more religious sense about it, like from thinking from like a Buddhist perspective. I'm not a Buddhist, but like I love some of the messaging, and suffering brings you closer to God, right? Suffering illuminates the deeper struggles of mankind, connects you to like a higher power in some way. So another way to say that is like, it brings you great empathy getting through struggles, brings you to like appreciating other humans, like in mass. Like I appreciate humanity. I feel like I have a soft spot for humanity. I want all humans to thrive, not just the ones that are closest to me. And I feel that because the suffering I've experienced kind of has opened the door to just want everyone be able to experience peace. And my path to finding peace in myself has been like a real journey. So for my kids, yeah, my daughter Lucy is 14. My son Francis is 2. Lucy has not had the same struggles. If you were to look on paper, like it would seem like she's got like a pretty delightful life, and her experience thus far is her parents are in a really stable, happy marriage, and she has not had anything impede on her own success in her life through injury or illness, or nothing bad has happened. And so do I worry about her sense of resilience? Yes, I do. And that said, there's a side to it that we talk a lot. I tell her sort of stories of what it was like for me, not like from a distance, but like we'll like, kind of lay in bed next to each other and just talk about it and be like, I want to share this with you because I think it's important for you to have some context. She's one of the most empathetic people that I've ever met. And she's had small, rejections from different, trying to make this team, trying to do this, she's been trying to do things that maybe she was not totally prepared to make the team or make the cut just yet. Mm-hmm. She had not put in the same time yet some of the other kids had. And I see her attitude about it, and I see it of like so much wiser than I ever was about it. I see it like, she's like, Dad, it's cool that I tried, right? Like, I really just wanted to, like, she just tried out for the tennis team from middle school. She had decided 6 weeks before. And I was like, gosh, it's, that's going to be tough. She's like, well, let's just give it a try. And so she and I just played a bunch, and I gave her lessons to get her in shape for her. And now she's like, well, I didn't make the team, but let's just play more tennis together.
Wow. I mean, that's a great attitude. I think it's a blessing.
Part of the resilience as it pertains to like discipline and a certain amount of grit that you have to put in to succeed in a life in kitchens. It's a very distinct thing, right? That we share when we meet other chefs that we know that have had similar, that you were in this kitchen. There's a respect among us, not because like it's a weird fraternity. It's because I know how hard you had to work in order to get to where you are. I know how much determination, how much grit it must have taken you to be in that place. So I have an instant admiration and respect by way of empathy for you. That said, I wondered, like, the way I see that the resilience mechanism in my daughter, as she has confidence, she has real confidence by way of bad things not happening to her. I wonder about, is it a false paradigm?
Yeah.
The resilience paradigm. You know what I mean? Is it, because I've spent the last 30 years buoying myself by like, no, I'm a tough guy.
Yeah.
Because I can get over being a disability or being deaf or my dad being in prison or my friend's dying, or, I can get through that by way of resilience. But would I just experience more joy more easily if those things didn't happen? I don't know.
I mean, look, I don't think you can experience the level of joy and gratefulness without the other side of suffering. I mean,
absolutely.
Many of us have it, right? Like I remember cutting weight when I was in wrestling for many, many years, and you don't eat for 3-4 days. And then that first bite you have nothing tastes better than that, right? And, now I fast for 5 days because I'm trying to go after that adversity. And yeah, I think about for our kids or even for our team, because cooking is now a very different thing than it was 20 years ago when we started, when it was difficult to even find a job, let alone get them to bring you in. But there's no way around the fact that it gets easier every generation because it's supposed to. But that doesn't mean that, and we have to like protect our kids and our team from externally, terrible things. But I also do think it's sort of incumbent upon us to help them go after ways to find, this sounds bad, some form of suffering. Because look, your daughter is confident and it sounds like she has a great attitude. And that's awesome. And she needs to keep that. But at some point, she'll do something that she really wants and that won't work. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think if you never experience that, or you never experience like something that really, lets you know like, hey, not everything in this world is going to work out for you. You can have this expectation that it's supposed to. And then when it doesn't,
Yep.
you feel slighted. It's funny that the CEO of this company called NVIDIA had this big, everybody's talking about this video. He was talking to students at Stanford, and basically what he said was, high expectations is the easiest way to be unhappy.
Yep.
This coming from one of the, like the largest companies in the world. And yeah, it's so interesting too. I'm hearing you talk about your daughter, and of course you want to protect her, but at what part of our job for our kids or for our team is to also find ways for them to see, hey, guess what? There's also some tough things here, and you should go through that and fail because
it's interesting. We're at a funny little moment right now. I won't get too deep into it, but she's about to go to high school. We're in a magnet program, and we're getting pushback about one of the schools that she got into where she wants to go, and whether or not she gets to go there. We're not certain, right? And I hear you, and yeah, I want to protect my children with every bone in my body. Every instinct in me says protect them, and then the reasonable part of me says protect them, but contextualize it. Like, don't protect them blindly. Like, if I pull them out of traffic that they're walking into, I don't say, cool, let's keep going. I say, hey, I want you to understand what was about to happen. What was, that our lives were almost totally different at this turn. I've spent a lot of time talking to Lucy about trying to contextualize like what her life is like versus what her mom and I childhoods and lives were like. I want to kind of just like lay it in the simplest, most bare way for her. I want to make sure that she has opportunity. I want to protect her from monsters,
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I also want her to know that monsters are there, and there's a point at which I'm not going to be able to protect her from the monsters,
Yeah.
whatever they may be.
This show is brought to you by, you guessed it, Mies. Mies helps thousands of restaurants and food service businesses all over the world build profitable menus and scale their business successfully. If you're looking to organize your recipe IP and train your team to put out consistent product every day in less time than ever before, then Mies is just for you. And you can transform all those old Google Docs and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google Sheets into dynamic, actionable recipes in Mies in lightning speed. Plus, stop all that manual work of processing invoices, because Mies will digitize all your purchases automatically. And there's a built-in database of ingredient yields, prep yields, and unit of measure conversions for every ingredient, which means you're going to get laser-accurate food costs in a fraction of the time. Visit www.getmeez.com. That's GETMEEZ.com to learn more. And check out the show notes moving forward, because we're going to be adding promotions and discount codes so that all of you lovely and brilliant Mies podcast listeners get a sweet deal on Mies. Yeah. And independent of protection, I want to sort of steer this a little bit into your restaurant a bit, because I know I have to imagine this also impacts how you think about, your team. The whole, like, whenever you hear this message that we tend to say sometimes when we're older of like, in my day, we worked 15-hour days and it was 6 days a week and doubles, and we didn't have this and we didn't have that and da-da-da. That doesn't work, and it does, and no one really cares, and they hear it and they're like, yeah, whatever. And that may even be the case, and that's fine. That they have it. They're supposed to have it easier. Each generation is supposed to have it easier. I mean, before us, I'm sure it was even harder. But
Sure.
The beauty in it is that, like, at least I believe that it just means that the bar keeps getting raised of the more things that they can do, and it's our job to force them into new situations that are harder so that they can fail, right? to see that, maybe they, for the interest of the topics here, I'm going to kind of migrate us over to Loco d'Oro and your team, and then just generally kind of like restaurant teams and cooks and things like that. They don't work the same hours as us. They don't, you don't have the shift pay and the 6 days with doubles, and they don't have people throwing things at them. And those things don't happen anymore. That's awesome, actually. That's not a bad thing. But
For sure.
there was a part of that built this camaraderie with us, and it built, this going to war with your team. And there's also this premise of, you have to spend way more years mastering something than back then than you do today. And so all of that is true. But what do you do now, right? So they do have more opportunities. They do have better working conditions. So what's the new thing that we can sort of impress upon these younger folks to help them like raise the bar even more? I don't know what it is, but I'm curious if you think about that. You have your daughter and your kids, but like you also have a team of cooks. I remember this one, Peter was a young cook, worked for me, and then he went and worked for you. I think he's on his own, but like you have a lot of young cooks going through your kitchen, right? Like how do you think about that?
Mainly, I agree with the paradigm you presented is one I think about every day. And in some ways, I feel sorry or badly for them that they don't have context of the grit that it once took to be in a kitchen and how hard you or I might have needed to work or hustle to just get an opportunity, and that they can walk into, one of the best restaurants in their town and be like, can I have a job? And we're like, of course you can have a job.
Come on in.
Come on in. But very distinctly, like the way I think about it is, oh, you have more intellectual space because you are not being the part of you having to earn this in that way is unfettered. You don't have to earn it the same way. You don't have to grit it out. So that part of your brain is more accessible. So the thing that I can instill is that in my kitchens, you need to be more empathetic to succeed. The better listener you are, the more progress you're going to get. The more empathy you are very clearly showing to all the cooks around you, to the rest of the team around you, that your success is tied to that, right? And all the technical markers of achievement as a cook go along with that. But I feel like if you're becoming a good cook is becoming a good listener. You have to be present for the process. If you're present for the process, less is going to go wrong. And so I don't think it's that different, but I've framed it very differently to my staff, to my teams, in terms of what their markers of success are. Because I think our generation didn't have room for that. But I've realized that being more present is kind of the thing that all of us have been after throughout history, right? Is trying to show up and be able to fully be present for the environment that you are, be in that moment. And this generation has an opportunity to embody more of that more accessibly. And I think that's the thing that I'm trying to coach into them.
Yeah, it's tough. There's no way around it. It will always get a little, those things will start to get, easier and things get unlocked. There's a great book by Robert Cialdini called Principles of Persuasion, but it's basically about that. One of them is the scarcity principle. And, there's a parable about fraternities and why, fraternities have this hazing ritual and the importance of it. And the most important aspect of this, of course, you don't want people to be, hurt or things like that, is that because you have to go through this experience, and because not everybody can get in, and you have this adversity, you appreciate it so much more. Whereas if you just got in and they actually did a test, you just don't appreciate it as much. And I don't know if there's an impact of there's a lot of young cooks that love what they do and are really talented. So I don't know if there's an impact, but historically speaking, and based on science, it seems like there probably is some sort of impact of, because there's less of a roadblock to actually get in. I mean, you couldn't even stage at Le Bernardin in 2000, let alone get a job. Now I'm sure you're just walking in. There has to have some sort of impact on the appreciation of the industry when you can just kind of get any job you want.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like the parable of the gauntlet, like as you present, I think is a real one. And how do we create that? I just try to create a different gauntlet, right? Like the atmosphere for hiring is a different one. And the way we hire is totally different. At Locadoro, I hire almost exclusively for personalities that are going to be a great cultural fit for how we communicate together. Is this person going to work in the room?
Yeah.
If it's a yes, mostly I've been like, it doesn't matter if they've worked for 4 Michelin stars or if they've never picked up a knife in their life. The cooking is the easy part in a way, that teaching them to be the kind of human that will thrive in the environment that we're professing to foster is a little more challenging. The gauntlet that we run is like, can you show up and be the best of yourself?
Yeah.
And the way that we ask that of them, it's a lot of individual time, a lot of individual coaching, and kind of asking a group of people that are all of disparate levels to make a menu every day. To at Locadoro, like, we're making the menu from scratch every day. You have to show up and be great every day. And so there is a time, and this is 25 years ago in New York, where that kind of kitchen, like, we know I have a bunch of assassins on the line that all they know how to do is this, right?
Yeah.
These people are showing up. They don't have that level. They don't have the same skin in the game necessarily, right? And they don't necessarily have the same technical expertise. But what I'm asking them to do is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So the gauntlet is getting from A to Z despite that. And so there's no shaming. There's no, like, not shaming people. There's a high rate of failure is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I welcome that failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the daily, because that's how they learn.
Yeah. Another thing that you said that I wanted to sort of, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. You said you wanted to get techniques and ideas out of your system so you can get back in touch with where your soul lives, right? You grew up with an Italian grandmother cooking, and that's the food that you know and love. A lot of times we go to restaurants and we have, technically perfect food that doesn't really make us super excited. And then you have, go to a restaurant where it's technically not perfect at all, but it's delicious. And, in the same way that, like, a guitarist can do amazing arpeggios and be technically, like, amazing at scales, still might make music that is not enjoyable to us. The same thing exists in the kitchen, but you kind of have to have both. I'm curious for you, like, you definitely are instilling a lot more of sort of like the soul of cooking, but you technically know a lot about cooking. How do you balance that technique and soul in a professional kitchen where you have to have people execute at somewhat of a consistent level and that your customers can expect, and still technically be proficient, but also instill that soul that you're trying to get out of the vision of your restaurant?
I found that I have a series of specific recipes that help tell that narrative. And that when a new cook comes in, I know that they're going to make my tomato jam. It's going to be the first thing that they make. And the reason is because it balances some sort of fine technical cooking with high degree of presence necessary for the last stage of it. It needs some instinct and it takes some conversation to get through their recipe.
Yeah.
It's a very simple recipe, but we're adding a stabilizer late in the game. The big part of it is the tomatoes. We cook the tomatoes until they're just about to burst, right? Cooking cherry tomatoes whole, making basically an agrodolce, making a syrup, and then cooking the tomatoes in that syrup until just shy of 180 degrees. At 180 degrees, a tomato wants to burst.
Yeah.
At 174, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so we want to stop the cooking, right? When it's almost like when you're making popcorn, you're listening for that first kernel to pop. When you're making my tomato jam, it's like looking for that first tomato to pop, and then you're shutting the heat, give it a few minutes, and then we decide 3 minutes after that how many hundredths of a gram of the stabilizer we add.
Xanthan or pectin or something?
We're just using xanthan.
Yeah.
And it's relative to the amount of pectin that was in that collective of tomatoes in that batch, right? And so you have to take a spatula and swipe and see how much of a line it's leaving before you add it. So it's a simple recipe, but it requires a good deal of intuition to get right. And I teach it first because it's a good example of how I want to shape their cooking journeys with us. Is where I'm going to teach you technique. I'm going to teach you different techniques that may be familiar, may not be, but some of these things are tricky to learn. And the hardest part is just paying attention.
Yeah. Some of the best recipes require that, like the bricks level will change on something, throughout the year, and the tannin level. And no matter how prescriptive you are, some of that is that's what makes a great cook, is someone that can understand that.
Yeah.
It's funny that, just randomly, by the way, that's how I make all of my marmalades, like my strawberry or any berry, basically. Like, I can't stand when people cook down berries because they all taste exactly the same if you cook them down to sec. So I do the same exact thing with like strawberries, like peak seasons. Like, if you get perfect TriStar strawberries, the worst thing you can do is just cook them down to sec, because then they just taste like, like every other strawberry. Just cook them till they barely, just barely warm through. And then, you do have to have some sort of stabilizer, whether it's pectin or xanthan or something to.
Right. But I made that tomato jam recipe like from a marmalade recipe.
Yeah.
Right. Like I adapted it from that because it is that same idea of another reason I use that recipe first at Locadoro's. Who are we as an Italian restaurant? What is the story that we're trying to tell? Where a lot of the technique is not Italian, and ascribing technique to provenance is kind of a zero-sum game anyways. What's wonderful about the principle of Italian cooking is celebrating simple ingredients, right? And so all the technique that we use at Loca is based around that very simple principle of how do we shine a light on this thing. So in that tomato jam, it's like these mini San Marzano tomatoes that are grown in West Texas. When they're great, they're really great. How do we shine the brightest star on them? And what is the least interventive way to like highlight them? That's what I love about cooking altogether. That's like my soul in the kitchen is that credo altogether. For years, like, I was like, I'm going to get this done so I can get a job at Alinea, so I can learn these techniques. That's going to open doors for me. But I was thinking about it kind of backwards, that the techniques were going to open doors for me. The techniques are a subjective set. It's like subjective set of, it's kind of like different colors of paint, right?
Yeah, just a toolkit.
Right. Like, there's an appropriate toolkit for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Elvin Jones, the drummer, when I was a teenager, he's like, what do you got all those drums for? You only need 3 of them, And often it's true. It's true with everything, like the working with the simplest toolkit and being thoughtful within that is a real place of confidence. And after learning a lot of different techniques and trying a lot of different things, trying a lot of different restaurants and on for size and working there, I realized what's important to me, and technically where I have a voice.
Yeah. For me, like the things that we make in the kitchen, I look at this sort of like hierarchy of why we make them, right? So like, you first cook for yourself, right? Because you love to do it. And then hopefully you cook for I don't know if this is in this order, but like, you cook for yourself, and then you cook for the ingredient, right? And then you cook for, meaning like you appreciate the ingredient, like this thing at the peak season, or because you love blue crab and there's a way to, enjoy that versus Jonah crab versus snow crab. And then you cook for the team, meaning like you have to have some techniques involved so that they learn and they get, inspired by more than just the ingredients. And then you cook, of course, for the customer, right? Because you have to have an experience that the customer is like, wants to go there versus somewhere else and wants to leave home for this thing. And then some folks cook for the betterment of the industry, right? Like, you're sort of innovating to a place where, hey, these are net new things that we should learn. And not many folks do that. That's the NOMAs and things like that. That's a very difficult thing. But that spectrum, I feel like it's okay to sort of, over-index on any one of those. But I'm with you, man, on the ingredient piece of like, like, I love it when someone tells me I hate asparagus. And then I'm just going to go totally ham on, oh yeah, well, you probably have like, and go after it. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about cooking, is when you just focus on like, let me highlight this thing. It's in perfect season. It's the perfect crispness. Like, what texture should it be? What's like the least amount of things that I can add to it to make it delicious?
Locadoro, my first restaurant's been around for 8 years now. We just opened a new place called Bambino, a pizza joint. We opened 2 weeks ago.
Oh wow! What kind of oven are you using?
A Pizza Master.
Nice. What style of pizza, or is it multiple styles?
It's a one style, and it's a hybrid. It's a crispy bottom, very wide, fluffy edge, wide cornicione. So it's a hybrid of the kind of, the way I'm thinking about it is like the Tokyo manifestation of Neapolitan pizza, that has gotten like really hyperbolic with the edge, where it's beautifully custardy. I love like a little bit of crackle crispness to the bottom of a piece of pizza. That is magic to me. So it was combining those worlds, which was we spent the last 2 years working on trying to find a way into it. We're in a pretty good spot.
Is there some bread flour in there? Is it like what kind of flour are you using?
We're using it's all organic flour. It's pretty high protein, but not crazy high. And it's a meld of like 4 different flours.
Yeah.
It's a 3-day fermented, yeast added at, starter, biga, then starter, and then fresh yeast added.
Yeah.
So yeast added at 3 different stages.
Awesome. Wow. Next time I'm in Austin, I'm gonna definitely have to check it out. So did I read you have a cheese production too?
Oh, I started a water buffalo creamery and dairy. Started that in 2020. Yeah, and I got to travel a lot to Italy to work in cheese factories and do research for that, and working with a pal here and a rancher. After in 2021, as we were getting the retail shop open, and I was just working on developing the mozzarella, it was right when we were getting Locadoro back open after being shut down for a year and a half, and it turned into a joyless time trying to do both. So I gave up my interest in the dairy.
Gotcha. It sounds like you spent some time in Italy looking at those dairies. It's such an amazing culture of building cheese over there. I remember visiting outside of Parma, this Valserena Solo Bruno, which is one of the oldest Parm farms, and like one of the coolest things that I didn't think about. Most of the folks that are making the cheese on these farms, or at least on this particular farm, were Hindu, and it was because they have this incredible respect for the cow.
Yeah,
and they also don't drink, which is helpful. But it's like blew my mind that like, wow, that's so smart. And they love making this cheese, and it's incredible cheese. And there's such a cool world of all the ways in which cheese are produced in Italy. Of course, everywhere in the world there is. But
I love the culture of honoring the animal. I mean, I feel really complicated about dairy and the dairy industry because it's true. There's some very fancy, like water buffalo farms in Campania, outside of Naples, where it's like there is a tannery. You walk in and you get a tour, and the host is saying, "We only play a Beethoven for the animals. That's all they listen to. That's how they respond to it. This is the life they live." And like the water buffalo are just like clean. They're like supermodels of, they're just sparkling and clean. They do a wonderful job, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. Because I mean, the question I asked when I was there, I was like, "This is wonderful. What happens to the boys?" They're he's different, I was like, oh, there's a lot of carnage associated with dairy to make it happen. Like there's a lot of great work that's been done with semen samples to control breeding, so that if you're trying to breed cows, that you're mostly breeding female cows, so there's less death associated in the process. But ethically, I feel really complicated about it, because if I worry, and some of the nicest places that I've been don't have an ethical plan for the male animals that are born, or the plan that they do have in place is pretty inhumane and pretty atrocious, but it is not part of the narrative, and it's not part of the story that's told about them. And I was wondering, as you were saying that about the Hindu population that is working on that dairy in Parma, how they reconcile that problem from a religious standpoint.
Yeah, I'll have to find that out. It's tough, man. I mean, like there isn't.
I digress.
As soon as you start like scaling agriculture, I mean, you go to an avocado farm in California, every squirrel and rabbit and insect has been murdered in order to grow that avocado or that almond, and it's tough to get around. I think you have to kind of pick your battles, and there's not a place where you can just grow, everything in. I mean, we can't grow avocados in New York. It's a tough one. That's another episode. But we had some super delicious food in Locador. Now I realize whatever we ate that day was completely different the next day. So I didn't know that. But can you tell me a little bit about like the Austin scene has changed a bunch, right? So you opened Locador like 8 years ago. You just opened up a new spot. How has sort of this influx of, all these folks, tech folks and entertainment folks coming from all over, moving to the city, how has the scene changed over the last decade? Not just in terms of like the food that's there, but the culture and the community. Because I've seen a big, change from an outside perspective. Not to mention the real estate, but what have you seen? Having been there for so long.
The culture for professionalism has really like jumped up in the higher. There's a group of restaurants and of chefs that recognize in each other that they care, and that some of us care about the same thing. This kind of relates a little bit to the nonprofit that we helped start, Good Work Austin. I can get into that in a minute. Part of it is like, in terms of the scene, like the quality and like sort of cultural and ethnic distinction of different foods is really off the charts. The level of different kinds of service that you're able to witness, be a part of, is wildly different than when we got here. And the community, I talk to Phil Spear about this sometimes, because when I walked in, staged at Uchiko which had just opened the year that I was moving here, and he's quick to tell me that they had a really tight knit network of cooks then. And I feel like there's a new generation of cooks that have really banded together. And I think the value system has changed. The issues that we're talking about, the way that we communicate, I spent a lot of time in conversation, having coffee, hanging out, playing tennis with a lot of my friends are chefs and restaurant owners. And the community around it is something I'm so wildly grateful for. I'm grateful that there's a really high intellect. There's a lot of people that really, really care about hospitality and care about what does the future of hospitality here mean. And then there's a lot of like-minded people that care about sustainability and solving bigger problems outside of hospitality here. Most of that I didn't have access to when I moved here. And it's really great being part of kind of a scene where we have such a tight-knit community.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like the community has changed a bunch, and it's way more close-knit than it's ever been.
That's one side of it. It's like great and it's close-knit. The other side is it's created an environment where it seems like it's a great idea to open restaurants here. Right? And it's not. It's generally not. Generally, 80% of the people that are opening restaurants should not be. And there's a lot of money. There's a lot of kind of like funny tech money around that somebody's vanity project will open, and it's a little saturated.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that comes out in the wash, I mean, I think restaurants are the great equalizer. It either is going to work or it's not. And it's not always because it's good food or not good food, or good service or not good service. But,
yeah.
You learn quickly whether it's going to work or not.
That's right.
Well, cool, man. I mean, I'm curious, what does the next, 3, 4, 5 years look like for you?
It's a good question. We have this new baby in Bambino that we have really high hopes for, that we're really excited about. I'm really curious to find out what it's able to do, what its reach is going to be. Kind of like using pizza as a egalitarian food to connect people. How far does that further connect us within community in Austin, and what does that mean for us?
Does that mean you're thinking about, if it works, you want to scale it to more locations?
Yeah, that's definitely possible.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to jump to that until I know that's a good idea. It's like the soul of a place is the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
And replicating a soul, we have not figured out how to make that work. Replicating a concept that is soulful and having a team that is built up to do it again, that sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true, man. It's easy to look at restaurants as a sort of mechanical beast to then replicate. And I think that's usually when it goes wrong. I mean, look, there's a lot of other things that can go wrong when you try to go from 1 to 2 locations of something. Every problem scales. But, it's, Danny Meyer, I remember him, screaming this from the rooftops very often early on, and you see it in his restaurants, and you see the same thing with even something like Sweetgreen, right? Like you got to first like build something that people love and that you love and that you can put your finger on why.
Why?
And then you can decide whether it's worth, scaling. And I think oftentimes what happens is you start making some money and you just multiply that and say, or you're not making money, but you think if you multiply it, you will. and then that's how things scale.
Which, I mean, Locadoro has been like a wonderful kind of institution in town now for 8 years. And I'm just now learning how to be my new job is is as a restaurateur. It's like being between both restaurants, balancing and buoying both teams and being very present for both entities. I'm really excited about that challenge. And I have to every day, I woke up today and I was like, I think about that Denny Meyer quote all the time. That one's embedded in me. And think about why Locadoro has been around for 8 years. It is keeping things fresh is hard, right? Both internally and to the outside. And what today am I going to focus on that's special and beautiful about this place? And how am I going to talk to the team about it? And how do I want that to manifest to where our guests are going to find out about that special thing, right? That's my challenge for today. I think about that as that's the kind of challenge that I set up myself up for every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been writing a book.
Oh, no shit. That's cool.
I've been working on a memoir for the last little bit and writing stories. And I was harkening back to your question a couple minutes ago about like the next 3, 4, or 5 years. Like I want to get in a place where I can share a lot of the stories that are in there as stories that I've shared with my friends, my family, and a lot with my team. I want to get those stories out in the world and share that with the public.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that I have part of my next chapter is in celebrating that.
I love that. Well, I mean, just here today in the hour or so that we've been chatting, I didn't know half of these stories and they're so compelling and interesting. I want to learn more. So I'm excited to hear more about the book when it comes out, man.
Thanks, Josh.
Parting question for you. I don't know if you think about this. You could just say, I don't think about this, but I think about it sometimes as a fun little exercise for myself. But, if you had unlimited capital, unlimited resources, what are you not doing today that you would do given that if you had as much capital and resources and time as you needed to do it? Are there things that you're not doing today that are simply a limit of the amount of time and capital you have?
Mm-hmm. Number one would be the way I take care of my body. I'm envious of those that put their body first, and that's the natural order of things for them. For me, it feels like my family needs me, the team needs me, and these are at the top of the pyramid. And I've put my mental health at the top of the pyramid the last couple of years, and that's been really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Putting my sort of addressing just my physical health, my physical well-being. I've had a really hard time making that a priority, and it feels like it's a function of time, right? I need more time. I need to buy myself more time. That's the easy number one that comes up.
I mean, I know what you mean so much. It's so tough. I mean, we both have 2 kids. And it's like you wake up early, they're up early. You work all day and you come home for them and then you're with them and then you go to bed and then maybe you get some more work done and then you do it all over again. And I always struggle with working too much. And then,
Same.
I had obviously a wife and then kids and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have even less time. And for a very long time, honestly, Fiore, up until very recently, and I mean in the last 2 months, it took some therapy and some talking to some other friends. I just never put any time aside for myself. I would even put it on the calendar, but still not do it. And it was because I was just no, I can't. I've always exercised and woke up early to exercise, but the mental health part and other things I just never did. And even now, thinking about my kids, I'm there for them before school, after school, but there are things I would miss. I'd miss picking them up for a certain thing or an appointment they have, and my wife would do that. And for some reason, I don't know what clicked, but recently I just decided, you know what? I'm just gonna, if I miss a half day of work, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens if I just take an hour out. And then before I could just never do it. And it's been a couple months now. I gotta be honest, man. I think I'm more productive. I think I'm actually more productive and happier, and I have less guilt. And I don't think it's, like I have to be sensitive to the fact that, like not all of us own our own businesses where we can make our own hours and kind of do things kind of how we want. And also I'm sensitive to, like, as a restaurateur, you have less flexibility there, right? But, there's something to that. And part of it, I think, is also like, having an accountability person to say, hey, did you do that today? Did you take care of yourself? I started this app called Copilot, which is basically like a personal trainer remotely. It's fine, the personal trainer part, but just knowing that somebody like knows whether I worked out or not is kind of nice. But I know what you're going through, man. It's tough. I will say, I think you probably do have the time, and you just gotta, like, there's gonna be something else that has to get given up. But I wonder if, like,
totally,
you tested it out, if it would still be, would still work out.
I know that it's there. I know that it's really just a mental reordering of it, right?
Yeah.
The truth is, like, and yes, like I think we're both blessed in having the kind of autonomy that we have in our lives. With that, like, I recognize I can really do anything that I want, right? If it's what I really want. I mean this, like, on an existential level, any of us can do anything we want. There's a cost.
Yeah.
It's not free. There's a cost to trying. There's a cost to achieving, and there's some suffering involved in that. But I think maybe getting back to your first question, or the first thing we talked about, is maybe the greatest thing that suffering teaches you is that how the math works, right? You're like, I already know what it feels like to suffer. Am I willing to suffer to try to, climb this next mountain?
Yeah.
And generally the answer is yeah. Generally the answer is, like, what's on the other side of suffering is joy for achievement and appreciation for, like, a greater, deeper appreciation for life. So let's go get it.
Yeah. And I think the thing that we all have to remember, you and I, especially, and anybody in this scenario, is it can very quickly sort of bleed into this notion that we should just be suffering. And when we're having fun, oh, wait a second, no, this isn't right. And I think that's the part, and I'm 42, almost 43, like we're probably close in age. We're like, wait a second, I'm gonna be 50 soon. It's okay to have fun. It's okay, maybe, and even on a Tuesday, why not? And, we spend our whole lives as cooks or whatever else we're doing, like just working maniacally all the time, and life goes by. And I think it actually feels like more of a risk to do that than not. But at least for myself, I'm trying more and more to, like, put that out there because, I think that maybe it will actually just mean things will continue no matter what, even if I'm actually having fun outside of work or something.
Kind of removing the ego from the equation of, like, are they going to be okay with how?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be fine. And sometimes getting out of the way, even just for an afternoon, leaves room for somebody else to experience and learn more than they might have that day. And so long as you come back and you're there to support, and you ask the questions, and you're like, hey, what did you learn when I wasn't there? You're often paving the way for more full experiences.
Yeah, man.
As a leader.
Yeah. Well, Fiore, this was awesome. I really appreciate you not only taking time to chat, but opening up and sharing some of these stories. It was really just heartfelt, and I'm grateful that I got to hear more about your background. I'm stoked to come to Austin again soon and check out your new spot. So thank you, and let's go have some fun.
I would love to go have some fun with you. I got some ideas. Well, I hope to see you soon, and thanks so much for having me. This is a really awesome podcast. I love listening to it, and thanks so much for taking the time and having me on.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.